After traveling to Guadalajara, Mexico, and experiencing Bullet at Selva, Mágica, I immediately knew that I wanted to make a review video out of it. This is because of how undocumented and rarely talked about this ride is, but even better, this is the first individual review video for Bullet on YouTube. When I discovered that, not only was I shocked, but I knew right away that I had to make this video sooner rather than later. So here I am. It hasn't even been 2 weeks since my numerous rides on this thing, so I have a lot to talk about in this video. Today we will be diving deep into my experience with Bullet, we will dissect the layout element by element, and of course we'll be talking about what the ride is and the history behind it. Starting with the latter, Bullet is the world's only portable Schwarzkopf shuttle loop coaster. What do I mean by portable? Well, I say that because of how this ride was built. The model was actually meant for fun fairs, as it could easily be dismantled and rebuilt in different locations. Schwarzkopf had actually made many models that could do that, but I believe this is one of the few that is operating today in a permanent location. The ride was originally manufactured in 1981 and then erected in 1982 for Wiener Prater in Austria. At that park, it would never end up opening to the public due to noise complaints. Following this, Bullet would be relocated to Circus World in Florida, where it opened in 1985. Unfortunately though, the ride would again cease operation due to its high amounts of intensity. Heaven forbid why someone would complain about that. Come 1988, a German showman company bought the ride and made some changes to it so that it could operate on the German fair circuit. They would start by adding a second drive motor to the coaster, resulting in a slower initial launch speed, and therefore came with less power needed and less maintenance work needed to operate the attraction. After a couple successful years on the circuit, the ride made its way over to Flamingo Land in the United Kingdom, where it ran for 14 years from 1991 to 2005. Then it has been said that the ride was sold to Vekoma of all companies, which is an infamous manufacturer based out of the Netherlands. Then, Vekoma sold it once again to Selva Mágica. The ride would lay in storage until around 2013, where construction began and where the ride would eventually open up that same year. Talk about a history lesson, there were some things in here that I just learned myself. Anyways, what about Selva Mágica? What is it? Well, it's a small amusement park sitting on the outskirts of Mexico's second biggest city, Guadalajara. The way I got myself to the park was by Ubering my brother and I from the Historic Center, also known as the Centro Historico, which is where we were staying. By the way, if you ever do decide to take a trip to Mexico, Uber is highly recommended as a very efficient, very cheap, and very safe way of transportation. When we eventually got to the park about an hour and a half after opening, I ran to an area of the parking lot where you can best see Bullet from the outside of the park. At this point, I saw two people working on maintenance for what seemed to be the drive tires making up the first launch in the station. I didn't think much of this, even though the park was open by now, because it was the one and only coaster not listed on the list of closed attractions. While waiting in a line to redeem my brother and I's pre-purchased admission tickets, I did hear Bullet loudly roar through its layout. Although the ride itself was out of sight from the line I was in, I quietly celebrated and admired the sounds of yet another test run that would happen soon after. After this, when we finally made it into the park, we saw that the line was open, but not a single soul, with the exception of the two ride-ups, were in the station. An employee off to the side reassured us in Spanish, saying that Bullet was going to open at noon. I personally did not understand a word she said, but my brother translated for me and let me know what she was saying. At the time, it was probably 11:15 a.m., so we chose to pass time by heading on the park's log flume, which was basically the only other ride there that we had any interest in experiencing. That is, of the ones that were actually operational, because very few were. Come noon, we were back at the entrance for Bullet, and the first thing we saw was a big line of people waiting to get on it. Of course, the first thing we did was get right in line, and we witnessed the first public riders of the day blast through the layout, following a countdown from 10 to 1 in Spanish before the launch. Although it did end up taking around 30 to 45 minutes to get on the thing due to slow operations, we were lucky enough to ride Bullet in the very front row for our first ride. I would later discover that the front row is the best seat in the house due to the speed, smoothness, and that feeling of being a bit more up close and personal to the ride itself. We followed this up by waiting in an equally long line to do it again, this time for the very back row. This was easily more intense than the front, but I'd argue slightly less enjoyable because of the lack of things that makes the front so good. Regardless, both are great, and we'd end up heading out following these two rides. By the time we'd gotten off for a second time, it was already around 1:45 p.m., so we wanted to get back to the city and do some more exploring in the cathedrals and churches. But as we Ubered back to Centro Historico, I could not help but be so grateful for what I just experienced. Believe me when I say that very few enthusiasts get around to riding Bullet, and it is a huge bucket list coaster for many people all over the world. As I was looking back at my two rides, I went element by element in my head and dissected the ride experience while it was fresh in my mind. That, my friends, is exactly what I'm going to be doing for you guys right now. Basically, you start by boarding on a curved section of track, and the further through the station that the S-bend goes, goes, the more it's slanted on its side. Since we first rode in the front row, we boarded and it felt like we were already about to fall to our side. But before any launch occurs, the ride rolls you out of the station ever so slightly and puts you even further on your side, almost to the point where it felt close to 90 degrees. I have never had a coaster experience quite like that before. It was absolutely hilarious. After an aforementioned countdown from 10 to 1 in Spanish, you accelerate backwards through the station, up your first spike. This one propels you up using drive tires and then rockets riders back down towards the S-bend. Now believe it or not, this little curvy bit of track right here is one of the best parts of the ride. Blasting through it with the station almost acting as a tunnel, it's super awesome and quite aggressive too. You follow this with a bank turn that wraps around and leads into a 360-degree vertical loop. Fortunately, Bullet happens to feature one of Schwarzkopf's famous circular loops known for pulling some wild positive G-forces. Before even traversing the inversion, however, you have a crazy near-miss element with the station, and before you know it, you are upside down and begin to gray out. It's an awesome sequence of sensations, I'll tell you that much. With that said, the gray out clears up quite fast, but the reason I actually really like that is because this is a great moment of intensity, because it wasn't overwhelming and it still allowed you to enjoy the experience. This then led into the next transition, which is a compact, low-to-the-ground turn leading into another spike. This one takes riders up once again using drive tires and then shoots them back downwards to traverse the layout in reverse. While I didn't think the low-to-the-ground turn was as good going backwards, I will say that the near-miss element was on another level. As you spiral around the station again, you come face to face with the extremely minimal clearances. I saw multiple riders that either ducked or lowered their hands because they thought they were going to hit something. That is how awesome this near-miss is. It's easily one of the best near-misses I've ever experienced. Coming out of this loop, which is also pretty intense in reverse, you enter the turn from earlier and head back through the station. The drive tires in there will slow your train down along with the ones on the first spike, of which work together to bring riders to a halt. That right there concludes your ride on Bullet, a coaster that defines short but sweet better than almost any other I've ridden. So I guess that's it. I've given you all an element by element breakdown, a freaking history lesson, and I talked about my experience with the ride. I think all we really have left to discuss is a ranking from 1 to 10. In case I make more coaster reviews in the future, a score is something that I'd always want to bring back. For Bullet, I'm going to give it a solid 8 out of 10. Keep in mind that a 10 out of 10 would be like, whoa, this is one of the best rides on earth, and a 9 would be the caliber of rides just behind it. To me, an 8 is just about as good as it gets without being seen as necessarily elite. I think it makes perfect sense to why Bullet isn't seen as an elite coaster, because it's not very big, it's pretty short, and it also doesn't have much sensation diversity. It does have some excellent intensity and near misses, but of course it doesn't really have any airtime and stuff like that. Plus, it isn't exactly the biggest adrenaline rush in the world, but that's also coming from a guy who lives in the States. With this said, I'd argue that what it does well, it does very, very well. For that reason alone, Bullet gets a massive thumbs up from me, and I'd even say it made going out to Guadalajara alone worth it. So with that, I thank you all for watching today's video. Let me know in the comments what you thought of it and what you think of Bullet down below. More likely, I suspect that less than 1% of you guys watching have actually ridden Bullet, at least in its location in Mexico, but still let me know if you desire to ride it or if you learned something new in the comments. Thank you all again for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye guys.